Order, and I think members are by now aware that I am chairing the meeting today due to the unavoidable absence of our regular chair, Mr. Workington, and we certainly wish his family well during a difficult time here today. This is meeting number 21 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy, and Ethics. We are resuming our study on the protection of privacy and reputation on online video platforms such as Pornhub. And I would like to remind you today's meeting is webcast and will be made available via the House of Commons website. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021, and therefore members may attend in person in the room or remotely using the Zoom application. I believe, Madam Clerk, that the witnesses have been briefed on the usual procedures for the hybrid format. So I only need to remind all present that members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice, and to please use the raise hand feature should you reach to speak or alert the chair. And a reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair.
Point of order. Point of order.
Mr. Angus.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, Madame Shanahan, I want to welcome you as your first running, and I know it's going to be very successful as chair, and certainly we all express our concerns for Mr. Workington and his family. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted a point of clarification because I know there will be committee business, but in case I have to step out, I'm just asking just for a minute of clarification. At the January 29th meeting, we passed a motion where we were going to call Mr. Victor Lee, Madame Marquez, as well as Guy Spencer Elms, and that we would be issuing summons. Now, I know we've issued the legal summons on Mr. Victor Lee and Madame Marquez, but I didn't hear the status of Mr. Guy Spencer Elms, who is the key director of many of the financial operations of the Kielburger operations in Kenya. And given the really disturbing allegations that have come out both by CBC Fifth Estate and Bloomberg, I think his testimony will help clear the air for a lot of people. Particularly the allegations of children being beaten in the schools in Kenya, which I think we'd all find pretty shocking and surprising. So could the chair tell us if Mr. Spencer Elms has agreed to come before our committee? Would that be a yes or a no?
I believe, Mr. Angus, that the clerk has been working in that regard and can provide us with an update. So the clerk, if she can tell us what she can now, but we will be addressing this in committee business in camera at 1:30.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have been unable to reach Mr. Spencer Elms at this point.
So Mr. Spencer Elms, who runs a major law firm in Kenya, has not responded. You've not been able to contact him at all?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. I recognize Mr. Fergus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I perhaps it was just me because I wasn't here during the sound checks. I see that Mr. Angus is participating in person at the committee room along with our clerk. I was wondering if, Madam Chair, through you, if I could ask the clerk of which other members might be appearing in person today.
Very good, Madam Clerk.
Person as well here.
Mr. Arnold Viersen.
Welcome, Mr. Viersen. Thank you. I appreciate clarification on that with the hybrid format. It's not always easy to see who is in person in the room and who is on screen. I would like to proceed now with welcoming our witnesses for today for this very important study. As the witnesses know, they have time for presentation. So from the Canadian Centre of Child Protection, we will hear from Leanna McDonald, the Executive Director, and Lloyd Richardson, the Director of Information Technology. We also have with us the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, Daniel Barnhard, the Executive Director, and as well from the National Centre of Missing and Exploited Children, Mr. Clark, President and Chief Executive Officer. I believe that each of you has a presentation. Ms. McDonald, the floor is yours for 7 minutes. Ms. McDonald, you are on. Welcome to Hybrid Committee.
Sorry about that. Are we good? Good morning, Mr. Chairperson and distinguished members of the committee. We thank you for giving us this opportunity to present. I am Leanna McDonald, Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, a charity dedicated to the personal safety of children. Joining me today is Lloyd Richardson, our Director of Technology. By way of background, our agency operates cybertip.ca, which is Canada's tip line for reporting the online sexual exploitation of children. The tip line has been operating for over 18 years and currently receives on average 3,000 or more public reports per month. Our agency has witnessed the many ways that technology has been weaponized against children and how the proliferation of child sexual abuse material, otherwise known as CSAM, and non-consensual material fosters ongoing harm to children and youth. Over the last decade, there has been an explosion of digital media platforms that generate pornographic content. This, coupled with a complete absence of meaningful regulation, has created the perfect storm whereby transparency and accountability children have been forced to pay a terrible price for this. We know that every image or video of CSAM that is publicly available is a source of re-victimization for the child in that image or video. For this reason, in 2017, we created Project Arachnid. Processing tens of thousands of images per second, this powerful tool detects known CSAM for the purpose of quickly identifying and triggering the removal of this illegal and harmful content. Project Arachnid has provided our agency with an important lens into how the absence of a regulatory framework fails children. To date, Arachnid has processed more than 126 billion images and has issued over 6.7 million takedown notices to providers around the globe. We keep records of all of these notices we send, how long it takes for a platform to remove CSAM once advised of its existence, as well as data on the uploading of the same or similar images on platforms. At this point, we would like to share what we have seen on MindGeek's platforms. Arachnid has detected and confirmed instances of what we believe to be CSAM on their platform at least 193 times in the past 3 years. These sightings include 66 images of prepubescent CSAM involving very young children, 74 images of indicative CSAM, meaning that the child in the image appears pubescent, roughly between the ages of 11 to 14, 53 images of post-pubescent CSAM, meaning that sexual maturation of the child may be complete, and we have confirmation that the child in the image is under the age of 18. We do not believe the above numbers are representative of the scope and scale of this problem. These numbers are limited to obvious CSAM of very young children and of identified teenagers. There is likely CSAM involving many other teens that we would not know about because many victims and survivors are trying to deal with the removal issue on their own. We know this. MindGeek testified that moderators manually review all content that is uploaded to their services. This is very difficult to take seriously. We know that CSAM has been published on their website in the past, and we have some examples to share. The following image was detected by Arachnid. This image is a still frame taken from a CSAM video of an identified sexual abuse survivor. The child was pubescent between the ages of 11 to 13 at the time of the recording. The image shows an adult male sexually assaulting the child by inserting his penis in her mouth. He is holding the child's hair and head with one hand and his penis with the other hand. Only his midsection is visible in the image, whereas the child's face is completely visible. A removal request was generated by Project Arachnid. It took at least 4 days for that image to come down. The next example was detected also by Project Arachnid. It is a CSAM image of two unidentified sexual abuse victims. The children pictured in the image are approximately 6 to 8 years of age. The boy is lying on his back with his legs spread. The girl is lying on top of him with her face between his legs and her own legs straddling his head. The girl has the boy's penis in her mouth and her face is completely visible. The image came down the same day we sent the notice requesting this removal. We have other examples, but my time is limited. While the spotlight is currently focused on MindGate, we want to make it clear that this type of online harm is occurring daily across many mainstream and not so mainstream companies operating websites, social media, and messaging services. Any number of them could have been put under this microscope, as MindGate has by this committee. It is clear that whatever companies claim that they are doing to keep CSAM off their servers, it is not enough. Let's not lose sight of the core problem that led to this moment. We've allowed digital spaces where children and adults intersect to operate with no oversight. To add insult to injury, we have also allowed individual companies to decide the scale and scope of their moderation practices. This has left many victims and survivors at the mercy of these companies to decide if they take action or not. Our 2-decade-long social experiment with an unregulated internet has shown that tech companies are failing to prioritize the protection of children online. Not only has CSAM been allowed to fester online, but children have also been harmed by the ease with which they can easily access graphic and violent pornographic content. Through our collective inaction, we have facilitated the development of an online space that virtually has no rules, certainly no oversight, and which consistently prioritizes profits over the welfare and the protection of children. We do not accept this standard in other forms of media, including television, radio, and print. Equally, we should not accept it in the digital space. This is a global issue. It needs a global coordinated response with strong, clear laws that require tech companies to do this. Implement tools to combat the relentless re-uploading of illegal content. Hire, train, and effectively supervise staff to carry out moderation and content removal tasks at scale. Keep detailed records of user reports and responses that can be audited. Be accountable for moderation and removal decisions and the harm that flows to individuals when companies fail in this capacity. And finally, build in by design features that prioritize the best interests and rights of children. In closing, Canada needs to assume a leadership role in cleaning up the nightmare that has resulted from an online world that is lacking any regulatory and legal oversight. It is clear that relying upon the voluntary actions of companies have failed society and children miserably. The time has come to impose some guardrails in this space and show the leadership that our children deserve. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. McDonald. Mr. Barnhard, your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madame la Présidente, honorable.
Madam Chair, honorable members of the committee, thank you for having invited me to come and appear before you today. I am Danielle Bernard. I am the Executive Director of Friends of Broadcasting. It's an independent citizen organization that defends the Canadian culture and values in broadcasting.
Friends released Platform for Harm, a comprehensive legal analysis showing that under long-standing Canadian common law, platforms like Pornhub and Facebook are already liable for the user-generated content that they promote. On February 5th, Pornhub executives gave contemptuous and frankly contemptible testimony to this committee, attempting to explain away all the illegal content that they promoted to millions of Canadians and millions more around the world. But amoral as the Pornhub executives appear to be, it would be a mistake, in my opinion, to treat their behavior as a strictly moral failing. As Mr. Angus said on that day, the activity that you are studying is quite possibly criminal. Pornhub does not dispute having disseminated vast amounts of child sexual abuse material, and Ms. McDonald just confirmed that fact. On February 5th, the company's executives acknowledged that 80% of their content was unverified, some 10 million videos. and they acknowledge that they transmitted and recommended large amounts of illegal content to the public. Of course, Pornhub's leaders tried to blame everybody but themselves. Their first defense is ignorance. They claim they can't remove illegal content from the platform because until a user flags it for them, they don't know it's there. And in any case, they claim that responsibility lies with the person who uploaded the content and not with them. But the law does not support this position. Yes, uploaders are liable, but so are platforms promoting illegal content if they know about it in advance and publish anyway, or if they're made aware of it post-publication and neglect to remove it. Which brings us to their second defense, incompetence. Given the high cost of human moderation, Pornhub employs software to find offending content, yet they hold themselves blameless when their software doesn't actually work. Like Mark Zuckerberg has done so many times, Pornhub promised you that they'll do better. But Madam Chair, will do better isn't a defense, it's a confession. I wish Pornhub were an outlier, but it's not. In 2018, the US National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received over 18 million referrals of child sexual abuse materials, according to the New York Times, most of it found on Facebook. Promoted child sexual abuse material is now so vast that the FBI must prioritize cases involving infants and toddlers, and according to the New York Times, quote, are essentially not able to respond to reports of anybody older than that, close quote. Ces plateformes diffusent aussi.
These platforms also broadcast content that is not necessarily sexual. We can also find incitations to violence, death threats, and the sale of illegal drugs and weapons. The Alliance to Counter Crime Online finds that kind of content constantly on Facebook, YouTube, and Amazon, and there's even an illegal market for human remains on Facebook. The volume of content that these platforms process does not mean that they are not guilty of distributing illegal content. If mass distribution of illegal content is an inevitable secondary effect of your company, well, then your company should not exist. That's it.
Can you imagine an airline being allowed to carry passengers when every other flight crashes? Imagine if they just said, flying is hard, and kept going. Yet Pornhub and Facebook would have you believe just that operating illegally is fine because they can't operate otherwise. That's like saying, give me a break, officer. Of course I couldn't drive straight. I had way too much to drink. The government promises new legislation to hold platforms liable in some way for the content they promote, and this is a welcome development. But do we really need a new law to tell us that broadcasting child sexual assault material is illegal? How would you react if CTV did that? Exactly. Our research in closing is clear. In Canada, platforms are already liable for circulating illegal user-generated content. So why hasn't the Pornhub case led to charges? Perhaps you could invite RCMP Commissioner Lucky to answer that question. Ministers Blair and Lametti could also weigh in. I'd be curious to hear what they have to say. Now, don't get me wrong. The work that you are doing to draw attention to Pornhub's atrocious behavior is vital. But you should also be asking why this case is being tried at committee and not in court. Here's the question. Does Pornhub's CEO belong in Hansard or in handcuffs? This is a basic question of law and order, of Canada's sovereignty over its media industries. And it is an urgent question. Canadian children, young women and girls cannot wait for a new law, and so neither should we. Thank you very much. I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnhard. Mr. Clark, your presentation.
Good morning, Madam Chair Shanahan and honorable members of the committee. My name is John Clark. I'm the president and CEO of the US-based National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, otherwise and sometimes known as NCMEC. I'm honored to be here today to provide the committee with NCMEC's perspective on the growing problem of child sexual exploitation online and the role in combating the dangers children can encounter on the internet, and NCMEC's experience with the website Pornhub. Before I begin with my testimony, I'd like to clarify for the committee that NCMEC and Pornhub are not partners. We do not have a partnership with Pornhub. Pornhub had registered to voluntarily report instances of child sexual abuse material on its website to NCMEC, but this does not create a partnership between NCMEC and Pornhub, as Pornhub recently claimed during some of their testimony. NCMEC was created in 1984 by child advocates as a private nonprofit organization to help find missing children, reduce child sexual exploitation, and prevent child victimization. And today I'll focus on NCMEC's mission to reduce online child sexual exploitation. NCMEC's core program to combat online child sexual exploitation is the Cyber Tip Line. The Cyber Tip Line is a tool for members of the public and electronic service providers, or ESPs, to report child sexual abuse material to NCMEC. Since we created the Cyber Tip Line over 23 years ago, the number of reports we received has exploded. In 2019, we received 16.9 million reports to the Cyber Tip Line. Last year, we received over 21 million reports of international and domestic online child sexual abuse. We have received a total of over 84 million reports since the Cyber Tip Line began. In the United States, federal law requires a US-based ESP to report apparent child sexual abuse material to NCMEC's Cyber Tip Line. This law does not apply to ESPs that are based on other countries. However, several non-US ESPs, including Pornhub, have chosen to voluntarily register with NCMEC and report child sexual abuse material to the Cyber Tip Line. The number of reports of child sexual exploitation received by NCMEC is heartbreaking and daunting. So too are the many new trends NCMEC has seen in recent years, and these trends include the following. A tremendous increase in sexual abuse videos reported to NCMEC, reports of increasingly graphic and violent sexual abuse images, and videos of infants and young children. And these include on-demand sexual abuse in a pay-per-view format and videos showing the rape of young children. A broader range of online platforms being used to access, store, and trade and download child sexual abuse material, including chats, videos, and messaging apps, video and photo sharing platforms, social media and dating sites, gaming platforms, and email systems. Now, NCMEC is fortunate to work with certain technology companies that employ significant time and financial resources on measures to combat online child sexual abuse on their platforms. And these measures include large teams of well-trained human content moderators, sophisticated technology tools to detect abusive content, report it to NCMEC, and prevent it from even being posted, engagement and voluntary initiatives to combat online child sexual exploitation offered by NCMEC and other ESPs, report content, and immediate removal of content reported as being child sexual abuse. NCMEC applauds the companies that adopt these measures. Some companies, however, do not adopt child protection measures at all. Others adopt half measures or as PR strategies to try to show commitment to child protection while minimizing disruption to their operations. Too many companies also operate business models that are inherently dangerous. Many of these sites also fail to adopt basic safeguards or do so only after too many children have been exploited and abused on their sites. In March of 2020, MindGeek voluntarily registered to report child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, on several of its websites to NCMEC's Cyber Tip Line. These websites include Pornhub, as well as RedTube, Tube8, and YouPorn. Between April of 2020 and December of 2020, Pornhub submitted over 13,000 reports related to CSAM to NCMEC's Cyber Tip Line. However, Pornhub recently informed NCMEC that 9,000 of these reports were duplicative, and NCMEC has not been able to verify Pornhub's claim. After MindGeek's testimony before this committee earlier this month, MindGeek signed agreements with NCMEC to access our hash sharing databases. These arrangements would allow MindGeek to access hashes of CSAM and sexually exploitive content that have been tagged and shared by NCMEC with other nonprofits and ESPs to detect and remove content. Pornhub has not taken steps yet to access these databases or use these hashes. Over the past year, NCMEC has been contacted by several survivors asking for our help removing sexually abusive content of themselves as children that was on Pornhub. Several of these survivors told us that they had contacted Pornhub asking them to remove the content, but the content still remained up on the Pornhub website. In several of these instances, NCMEC was able to contact Pornhub directly, which then resulted in the content being removed from the website. We often focus on the tremendous number of cyber tip line reports that NCMEC receives and the huge volume of child sexual abuse material contained in these reports. However, our focus should more appropriately be on the child victims and the impact the continuous distribution of these images has on their lives. This is the true social tragedy of online child sexual exploitation. NCMEC commends the committee for listening to the voices of the survivors in approaching these issues relating to Pornhub. By working closely with the survivors, NCMEC has learned that the trauma suffered by these child victims is unique. The continued sharing and recirculation of a child's sexually abusive images and videos inflicts significant re-victimization on the child. When any website, whether Pornhub or another site, allows a child's sexually abusive video to be uploaded, tagged with a graphic description of their abuse, and downloaded and shared, it causes devastating harm to the child. It is essential for these websites to have effective means to review content before it's posted, to remove content when it is reported as child sexual exploitation, to give the benefit of the doubt to the child or the parent or lawyer when they report content as child sexual exploitation, to block the recirculation of abusive content once it has been removed. Child survivors and the children who have yet to be identified and recovered from their abuse depend on us to hold technology companies accountable for the content on their platforms. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee. This is an increasingly important topic, and I look forward to answering the committee's questions regarding NCMEC's work on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. We will now turn to our first round of questions. Ms. Stubbs, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, I'm, as every day on this committee, shocked and sick to my stomach and haunted by the amount of time that this has all gone on. And thank you all for your work and your efforts and your expertise, and can't even imagine the level and the years of frustration that you must have. Thanks for being here today. And I can say I hope that at the end of all of this, there's actually to combat this scourge, rather than what happens sometimes where reports are written and then nothing occurs. I again hardly even know where to start. Ms. McDonald, you mentioned in your 2020 report about the various platforms, including Pornhub, that now I think many people's minds are being blown to include child sexual assault material. Can you just review again for us whether or not there are features that actually allow reporting specifically of child sexual abuse material on those platforms you reviewed?
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm going to turn this over to Lloyd Richardson, our Director of Technology, in 1 second. I think the point I want to make before he gives those concrete examples, is that we took that review on when we were examining the now signed on voluntary principles to address this that the many Five Eyes countries are signatories to. And so our agency wanted to kind of find out how easy was it for a user or a victim to report CSAM on a very well-known platforms. And so we were absolutely shocked at how difficult it was to often even find the term CSAM. So there were a number of tactics that we noticed that were used to actually discourage, if you can imagine, the reporting of CSAM. And we can only surmise because one, many of those companies just didn't necessarily want the numbers. They didn't want to show how much of that was on their platforms. And also, I think because of the volume of that coming in. Before Lloyd speaks to the examples, I also want to note the number of survivors that, as John Clark, our colleague and friend mentioned, are coming into organizations like ours right now. We have a tsunami of these victims who either are wanting to get their legal material down or they're having a difficult time reporting. And so the review was intended to shed light on a number of platforms and the inability for people to effectively and easily report. And Lloyd?
Yeah, so it's important to note that when looking at these different platforms, this is only one dynamic of how these companies operate in this space. So the ability for people to report in, hey, this is my material, please remove it. And we need to know that a lot of people aren't even necessarily doing that. So when we look at reports that we send in, typically industry will use the term trusted flagger programs and what have you. Essentially, that just means they pay more attention to child protection charities when they send a notice in. When a member of the public does it, it generally has a much lower priority. And this is typical across most tech companies, including MindGeek. Another piece that's a bit of an issue is that to actually remove something, it's not a one-click option. So the idea that these companies allow for the upload of this material, or historically have, and you can upload it with no sort of contact information, away you go. The process that you need to go to actually get something removed is quite heavy. In some cases, you need to provide identification. If you have your material up there, would you really want to provide your email address or contact information to a company like MindGeek? Certainly some of those things have changed, and MindGeek fared well compared to some of the big tech companies, but that certainly doesn't mean that they are doing very well in this space. Excuse me.
And just, sorry, one last point I want to make. It's really important also when we look at all the reports and even the information and the data that organizations like ours have and NCMEC, we only come across what we know. What we know, and we all understand this, a young adolescent girl who has had a sexual image of her land on sites like this, the fear, the humiliation, to come forward to organizations and even approach organizations for help is incredibly difficult. So what we know for sure is that we're vastly under our numbers of this type of victimization.
Right, very disturbing. I think I only have a minute left, so if we run out of time, I hope that they will get at this for all of our witnesses. One note, I'm just hoping you can help us understand better. I guess what I understand from testimony is that when these websites do have to take down child sexual abuse material, they'll put a notice up that says remove because of copyright instead of something like taken down because of a report to NCMEC. I wonder if you could comment on that. And then I guess, frankly, to Mr. Bernard's point, which I was out loud on mute supporting. What boggles my mind is it seems to me that at least by Canadian law, I'm glad that these things are being reported to NCMEC, but it seems to me that it's very clear that they have a responsibility to be reporting child sexual abuse material to the police. And so I'm just wondering if any or all of you have comments on those 2 points.
A very short answer, please.
Oh, shoot. Maybe they can get at it too later, farther in the hour, because I think these are the crucial questions for our committee.
I'll jump in real quick. You know, at the National Center, we do work with a lot of technology companies, and of course, we have encouraged their reporting. But of the approximately thousands of internet service providers, we only have about 170 that are actively reporting. Of that 170, there's only about 20, maybe less than 20, they're actually significantly reporting. So of course, we'd like to get that part of the whole ecosystem working well first, and then obviously reporting it to the police, because as has been noted, many of these instances are criminal activity. Make no mistake about it, it's criminal activity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. You can no doubt continue in a subsequent question. Mr. Sobera, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for everybody's testimony this morning. Very enlightening, and thank you for all of the work you do in this very important area, and just helping kids in a very bad situation. My first question, I just wanted to go over two numbers that were reported. I can go back to the blues, but I just wanted to get them out there now again. By the Canadian Center for Child Protection, use a number in billions of images. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's images scanned. So that's, if we're talking about needles in a haystack, that's the whole haystack in terms of images that we've detected. So we've sent 6.7 million notices to providers on images. So the 126 billion is not all child sexual abuse material. That's just the swath of material that we've scanned.
Okay, no, thank you. And to Mr. Bernard, I skimmed the report, the Platform for Harm Internet Intermediary Liability under Canadian law. I also saw that you had produced an opinion piece in the Toronto Star on Thursday, December 10th. So thank you for all the work you're doing in terms of holding to account providers of these images when they know that they should not be up there, if I can just put it in very plain language. I do wish to ask a question, and I believe if this is under your domain. In September 2020 report, Friends concludes that existing Canadian laws should be sufficient to hold platforms such as Pornhub accountable for illegal content that appears on their platform, despite the fact that the content is user-generated, is not created or uploaded by Pornhub. Can you explain your position in more detail, first part? And do you think, sir, that MindGeek's algorithms provide the company sufficient knowledge of non-consensual content to give it knowing involvement in their publication and dissemination?
Well, thank you, Mr. Cervera. I think that you've touched on a key point, which is a difference between the law in Canada and the law in the United States. So in the United States, there's been a lot of talk about the Communications Decency Act and Section 230 of that act, which holds platforms not to be liable for user-generated content that they are distributing. Can you hear me still?
Yep. Yes. Oh.
Yes, we can. We can hear you. No, now you're frozen. Sorry.
Can I move on then, Chair? Or
yes, please. We'll go. Yeah.
Okay. To the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, welcome and thank you for availing yourself, Mr. Clark. I'm very curious as what does a partnership with NCMEC entail?
Yes, thank you. It's a good question. We work with some of the internet service providers to, first and foremost, make sure they have good content moderation, that there's actually human beings looking for, seeking to immediately take down items, illegal content, CSAM material when it's first discovered. So we work and try to work closely with those companies who are more willingly and like-minded with us in trying to take down things that are apparently criminal activity and getting that off the sites, period. So that's one of the things that we look for when we're talking about, and I would put the partnership in sort of air quotes, if you will, making sure that we continue with more of a collaboration model working with the internet service providers.
And staying with you, Mr. Clark, I know Mr. Bernard is back on, and we'll get Mr. Bernard in my last minute or two of time. How many, you say internet service providers, how many adult platform providers would you have a partnership with currently?
I think right now it would be, and we don't typically, or technically, like I said, have a partnership with with Pornhub, although they have begun to voluntarily report, but I believe they're the only one. The others that we are working closely with are just large tech companies generally.
Okay, because that is a very important distinction when you have a partnership with internet service provider, which allows entities to put content up onto the web, onto their platform, versus having a partnership with what would be called an adult platform. If I'm making that distinction.
Understood.
Okay. Going back to Mr. Bernard, if you can continue your answer from there. Welcome back.
I'm sorry, the internet service providers are conspiring against me here. We're talking about a difference between American law, which holds companies that deal in user-generated content indemnified from that content, and Canadian law, which does not. And so in Canada, as our report documents, a company does become liable for something that somebody else said or did under two circumstances. First, if they know about it in advance and publish it anyway, but second, if they are notified about it after the fact and fail to take action. And so that's the first thing. And in the case of Pornhub, both appear to be true. They are notified and take a long time to remove content. And also to your point about algorithms and recommendation of content, we believe that they do have a pretty sophisticated understanding of what this content is. If a relatively small not-for-profit organization in Manitoba is able to deploy technology that can find this material in large numbers, surely a company the size of MindGeek can do the same thing. There is a difference between hosting content and actively recommending it to people. And in that sense, the platforms are arguably more liable and more responsible for the offending content than the users themselves.
Chair, please interrupt when I hit my time. Daniel, I would agree with you, because I think the algorithms, as we all know, with regards to especially social media platforms, are very powerful. You know, I think I have like 4,000 friends on Facebook, but I only see content from like 25 of them on a daily basis when I go and check. So we know that the AI technology that's being used to what people should see, or what's being recommended to that they should see and should be viewing, is very powerful. And I'm sure that this platform that we're talking about, this adult platform, utilizes that technology.
Yeah, I think you're entirely right. And I'm glad that you mentioned Facebook, because to some extent, I think the sexual nature, the shocking nature of this illegal activity can allow us to focus too much. The general question is, are these platforms responsible for illegal activity that they promote, period? And the child sexual abuse material is part of it. It's terrible. I have a 10-week-old daughter. This means, a lot to me. But we know that there's other illegal activity, including incitements to violence, the sale of drugs and arms. And
I'm sorry, I'll have to stop you there, Mr. Barnhart. Maintenant, on a Madame Gaudreau.
We now have Ms. Gaudreau for 6 minutes. I didn't hear. Was it my turn? Yes. Madam Chair, please let me know if I should turn off my camera, because for me too, internet coverage is not too good today. I'd like to thank you all the witnesses. Once again, you are giving us information that will allow us to not only have what we need to act, but also to determine the emergency of acting. I was talking with my children this weekend, and I was asking myself, what is it about this viral world for adult entertainment for children? What does that represent? And my impression is that we owe it to ourselves to have more of a global perception. When we hear you say that it's a law that's different from ours, so all the means, the business model is able to get through and avoid certain things. If we were to take the bull by the horns and decide to act quickly, preventively, before even giving that available space, we would need a license, or we'd need to prove that everything is happening legally and in a preventive manner. But beyond that, I'd like to hear you. When we're talking about legislation, we're also talking about what the structure is with our police, our law makers. There seems to be a lack of control. If we're going to act, I'd like to know how we can act, because currently we have a lot of data. Thanks to your methodology, we have reports that clearly show the emergency of this situation. But how could we act when it's an international issue? And if tomorrow morning we were to decide to legislate with extreme urgency, in other countries, the legislation is different. So perhaps we could start. I'm going to take the rest of my time to hear each witness. Perhaps Monsieur Bernhard could start. Thank you. I'm going to answer you in English in order to be very clear.
I think that the answer is that the incidents are international, but they are also very local. And Pornhub, MindGeek is arguably Canada's largest internet media company. Mr. Antoon lives in Canada, has property in Canada, and is fully subject to the jurisdiction of the RCMP. And so while the crimes may be perpetuated elsewhere, they are also happening in Canada. On cases where the company is resident outside of Canada, there is a lever that the government can pull, and that is the money. And so all of the money that comes from advertisers to those platforms can also be stopped. And just like it's illegal to buy drugs with a credit card issued by a Canadian bank, or to engage in some gambling activity, in the extreme case where a foreign company does not comply, we could also cut the money. And in this case, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. If that's not an incentive, I don't know what is.
Can I just also add in there, please? I think from our organization's perspective, we've been screaming from the rooftops that we are long overdue for regulation. I think it's incumbent upon us all to ask ourselves, how did we get here? We as an organization also, we look at the unregulated nature of the adult pornography issue. And there definitely needs to be more than a conversation about how we are going to take the keys back from industry. Internet freedoms don't mean freedom from accountability and responsibility for what users post on your services. And I think we have been definitely looking at, yielding the power to start with the 5 Eyes, at looking at ways countries can become unified in looking at sort of global standards of what we need to do here. And on behalf of children, we can certainly say, and they are citizens as well, we've never needed government more than we do now to step in and intervene.
And I would just say, from the U.S. based look at this, the marketplace for CSAM is a global one, and it requires a global effort. And as you might naturally believe and know, there's differences in laws around the globe that affect the privacy issues and what internet service providers can do on their platforms. But it has been reported over and over again, whenever it involves children or criminal activity, governments must step in and take a very strong stance at regulating what is going on when you're seeing child abuse, child rape, victimization over and over and over again. So we always urge countries near and far to really take a strong look at the legal issues that can be enacted to fight this.
Monsieur Bernard.
Mr. Bernhard, did you want to continue? I think I have 45 seconds left. Thank you.
Comment on something Ms. McDonald said, to disagree in hopes of agreeing with her, which is that I don't believe that the internet is in fact unregulated. I cannot commit fraud legally on the internet. I cannot steal legally on the internet. I cannot sell you heroin legally on the internet. And likewise, I cannot traffic child pornography legally on the internet, especially in Canada, where the law is clear that publishers are jointly responsible under the conditions I have outlined. And so the issue is not that it is unregulated. The issue is that the law is not being applied. And that is even more concerning because we do have the rules. And so the question of enforcement, I think, is very, very important. And that's what I'd like to focus on.
And just
you.
if I can just
Merci
add
beaucoup. No, on doit passer.
Unfortunately, we have to move on to the next question. Mr. Angus?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to each of our witnesses. If I cut you off, it's not that I'm being rude, but I only have 6 minutes, and we have so much to get to. In terms of legal obligations in Canada, in 2011, Parliament adopted the mandatory reporting for internet child pornography, and there were two provisions in that. One is that if an online provider found issues of child pornography, that they had a legal obligation to report to police, as well as they had a legal obligation to report to the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. And Madame McDonald, that is you. So we asked Pornhub about their compliance with Canadian law on this matter. Have you found them complying in Canadian law in reporting these multiple incidents that we've had to deal with?
Yeah, so there's two pieces there. The one side to law enforcement we couldn't really comment on. So on the law enforcement angle, it states is basically if an entity has possession of that material on their system, there's preservation requirements for them and they need to report to Canadian law enforcement. So that could be any police officer within Canada. The second piece is where an entity does not necessarily have possession of the CSAM. So they could be an internet service provider of some sort that has become aware on a different service of child sexual abuse material, and they can report to a designated reporting entity, which is us, the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. So speaking on that side of things, very recently, MindGeek has reached out to us to attempt to report through that means. So
when you say very recently, what do you mean by very recently?
In the last few months.
In the last few months, like maybe since the New York Times articles come out?
It could be pretty close to that time.
Pretty close to that, okay. Well, I find it interesting because when I read the law, it says on a service. They provide a service. If they're made aware of it on a service, my understanding is that they're obligated to report in Canada. When we asked them this, they said that they reported to NCMEC, Mr. Clark, which might be great, but it's still, to me, avoiding the issue of Canadian law. How long have they been reporting to NCMEC on allegations that are brought forward?
Their reporting to us has just been in recent times, recently within the last few weeks, probably.
The last few weeks?
The last few weeks, yes. Okay. And as was noted in, I think in my testimony, while they provided, I believe, around 13,000 reports, a lot of those were duplicative. We've also noted in some instances a very strong reluctance on their part to take down material that it's called in from people who have been victimized, but when we call them, they take it down.
Okay.
So there's still a lot of work to be done there.
My concern is, again, under Canadian law, and I imagine it is the same in the United States, in terms of the preservation requirements when an issue's been raised and flagged, the obligation to report. But when Serena Fleitas spoke to us, the young woman who I think has really blown the doors off this whole case, that was I think, a groundbreaking moment in changing the discussion. And when we asked Pornhub about the efforts that she took to get her images down, they said they had no record of her. I found that quite shocking. Under American law, because Ms. Fleitas is an American citizen, would there be preservation requirements so that Pornhub MindGeek would actually be accountable for the images that they had of her abuse, that they would at least have a record of it?
It would seem likely they should have a record of it. And, since NCMEC is a non-investigatory agency, we don't go to the further steps to investigate that relationship about what they're saying that they did or didn't do when somebody reported to them about CSAM material or asking them to take something down. We do engage and provide reports where the parent CSAM material directly to law enforcement as a clearinghouse. So that occurs at the National Center, NCMEC, on a daily, regular basis.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bernard, Sorry, I have to go to Mr. Bernard on this, on the issue of Canadian law, and we have spent a lot of time at our parliamentary committee on issues of compliance with the tech giants, and Pornhub MindGeek is a tech giant. It seems to me, in my reading of Canadian law, we have very strong laws to protect against non-consensual exploitation of images. We have strong child pornography laws. I believe there's only been one online investigation, and it wasn't against any company nearly as big as Pornhub. But I'd like to ask you, because under the safe harbor provisions that have protected the tech giants, is that they don't know what's on their servers. But Pornhub officials told us that they viewed every single image. So if they viewed every single image, then that means that they would endorse that image as being okay. So would you think that there'd be an issue of responsibility there, as well as the tags that identify knocked out teen, raped teen, would be the promotion of acts that we would consider illegal. They seem to be not sure whether teen is legal or illegal, but I think under Canadian law, do you believe that they would be protected under safe harbor provisions?
My understanding is no, and my understanding is that even in the United States, there is an exception to Section 234 child sexual abuse material. So even under the safe harbor laws of the United States, they would not be protected. I think, though, ultimately, Mr. Angus, I would hope that it would be a judge who would decide this. And the lack of charges here is particularly concerning to me. It appears to be a clear violation of the law, but that's not something that I'm able to pronounce upon. And so the police, law enforcement, prosecutors, judges really need to get involved here, because it does appear to be a very clear violation of the law.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Angus. We now turn to Mr. Viersen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. McDonald, your organization has done fantastic work. I had the opportunity of visiting your facility a number of years back, and got to see Project Arachnid in action, even though there's not much to see when you're at their facility. It's a bunch of lights blinking on computers. But nonetheless, recently, the Canadian Centre for Child Protection took steps to distance themselves from an international group that's received donations from MindGeek. Can you explain why you took this step, and would you consider MindGeek a partner in any way?
Yes, what ended up happening, we didn't realize at the time when the organization, the International Association you're talking about is In Hope, they had taken a donation from a company named MindGeek. At the time, we did not understand sort of the business structure and what all that meant. As soon as our organization became aware that this company owned a number of adult pornography sites, we immediately made the decision to take away our sort of membership there. And it was a very important decision for our organization, because we deal with survivors and victims, and many of them are teens. Many of them had come into us also talking about their victimization on these types of sites. And also, I just have to raise, because it's not subject to the conversation that we're having right now, but we have a huge issue with the lack of age verification. We have Canadians coming into us, and my 13-year-old, 12-year-old son was able just to go straight into a real graphic webpage called Pornhub. So from our organization standpoint, we could not continue with that. So we did make that difficult decision. We work with hotlines around the world. We do in other capacities, and we'll continue to do so because it's in the best interest of children. But that was why we made the decision.
Mr. Richardson, seeing as you're the tech guy here, we are the big trouble that we've been studying here at this committee is around just the age and the consent of folks that are depicted in these videos. And we hear a lot about how long it took to take the video down and things like that. But certainly there would be methods of ensuring that these videos never show up in the first place. And I was wondering if you just comment about that. If you're bragging that you are the leading tech company in the world, surely there's technology to keep this stuff off the internet to begin with.
There is, but I would kind of invert that a little bit. It's not a technical issue. Let's reverse back in time to the 1980s, before the popularized internet, when we had pornography and we didn't see child sexual abuse material showing up in Playboy magazine. It's not necessarily a technical issue. If you're in fact moderating everything that comes up onto your platform, this should never happen. We don't see the CBC show up with child pornography on its services because there's moderation that happens. We have control over the content. So that's not to say that you can't leverage technology as we do in Project Arachnid to do proactive detection of known child sexual abuse material. But really, let's not look at the new and fancy, oh, I have a AI classifier that can automatically detect child pornography. That's great and all, but it's never going to detect everything, and it's not going to have the sort of the accuracy that you have of actual human moderators looking at material. It's an addition to something that's already there. So it's important not to belabor the sort of technological side of things.
All right, Mr. Bernard, you look like you wanted to jump in on that one as well.
Oh, no, just to say that I agree. The platforms want to operate at a certain scale, which requires them not to validate any of the content that comes up. And yet that seems to result in illegal outcomes. And so it's not really for us to say how they should deal with this, but simply that if it's there, they should face the consequences. And to Mr. Richardson's point, just one final issue, it's not just CBC, CTV, et cetera, who make sure that their content is lawful. They also have to make sure that advertising that they run is lawful, and that op-eds and other third-party contributed content is lawful. Otherwise, they are jointly liable. This is how the law works, and I see no reason why it shouldn't apply in the case of Pornhub, Facebook, Amazon, or any other provider that is recommending and facilitating illegal behavior through their service.
Mr. Clark, when the executives of Pornhub were here...
A few seconds.
All right.
Pearson, just to let you know, just a few seconds.
All right, I'll make it a yes or no answer. They said that they had never reported in 2019 anything to NCMEC. Can you confirm that as well?
And that the missed part of your answer, you said that was Pornhub?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Right.
They did not.
Thank you very much. And the next up is Mr. Fergus for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dear witnesses, I would like to thank you for coming today to talk about this difficult subject. It is very hard to hear all of this. This is very difficult. This summer, I went to an international conference. There were several countries. There was the US and Germany who were attending this meeting, and we were Zoom bombed. During this meeting, there were graphic images with children, with very young children. I saw graphic images, and it really traumatized me. And now I'm listening to your testimony, and I've listened to witnesses in the last few weeks, and I must tell you that it is absolutely appalling. I would like to ask you a question. I'll be starting with Mr. Bernard, and then I'll ask a question to Madame McDonald, and then a question for Mr. Clark. Please tell us which country has struck the best balance to have strict laws forbidding the production and distribution of such videos. And so which country would you say has the laws that have enough teeth to be able to sue companies if they are broadcasting these videos? Mr. Bernard, could you answer the question, please?
Canada has already a pretty strong legal regime coming from hundreds of years of common law. The original case that we talk about in our report is over 100 years old and comes from Scotland and involves a defamatory notice on a message board.
Absolument, mais je vous demande.
Yes, absolutely. But where's the best balance? where you spoke earlier about the fact that there is no follow-up with the police forces to stop these videos from being produced?
I think the closest comparison I would give is Germany, which has a strong law, in this case talking about illegal hate speech, but again, illegal content, where platforms that are caught facilitating the transmission of this content can face fines of up to 50 million euros per infraction. That is an example of them getting serious. The United Kingdom is also talking about personal liability for online harms, not just for companies, but for their individual executives. And our Nanos polling from the fall shows that Canadians also overwhelmingly support such a move in Canada.
Madam McDonald, Monsieur Richardson.
Madam McDonald and Mr. Richardson. I'd ask you the same question, please.
Start, and then I'm sure Lloyd will jump in. It's very difficult to answer that question, and the reason it is difficult is because we see so many problems right through the continuum of where action would be taken. So whether it's on the enforcement side, wherever it is, we just are quite overwhelmed. And I think part of the challenge is really the way in which the internet was structured. I mean, people having the cloak of anonymity and the vast ability to transmit material in these capacities, issues such as end-to-end encryption and other things that are protecting the privacy rights of adults at the expense of the safety and well-being of children is sort of the common theme. But Lloyd, do you have a country you'd like to mention?
Briefly, Mr. Richardson, because I only have 45 seconds left, and I'd like Mr. Clark to answer the question as well, please. Otherwise, I could just give the floor to Mr. Clark.
It is a very dynamic sort of issue. It's not necessarily one thing. So there's examples of countries in the world that prohibit posting of adult content altogether. That would be one thing.
I just want, can I stop you there, Mr. Richardson? I don't know what, are we having trouble with my interpretation?
Oui, peut-être pendant que Mr. Richardson.
We'll just wait for Mr. Richardson to solve his microphone issue. Mr. Clark?
Our cyber tip reports to well over 100 countries around the globe. The ones that seem to work best are the ones that have a strong law enforcement involvement, judicial process, laws in place.
And they, which ones would they be? If you could very quickly, so we can get this on the record, sir.
We're talking primarily about the Five Eyes as good examples. I think that have strong laws. Not perfect, but very good laws.
But also on the enforcement side.
On the enforcement side, I would say that's true as well. We send our cyber tip lines to law enforcement organizations in those countries.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you very much, Mr. Fergus. Maintenant, Madame Gaudreau.
Madame Gaudreau, you have about 2 minutes and a half.
Madame Gaudreau.
Désolée, Madame la Présidente.
I'm sorry. Madam Chair, I can't hear when you speak. But now you can? Yes, I have 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Is that right? So we just heard it. 3 out of 4 Canadians have had some kind of fraud involving their personal information. So there needs to be some kind of control measures. So we were talking about how to work with law enforcement and have more coordinated action between you and law enforcement, because you are doing a huge job, because you're basically doing the work of a legal entity that would be, really the work of a privacy commissioner. But I wonder, because when I look at the millions of people who have not only had their private life turned upside down, but there's fraud in that as well. Here in Canada and in Quebec as well. So do you think that there should be an ethics commissioner, or there should be more rules to create better control? Is that urgent and necessary? Is that something that could lead to a model like the one in Germany? Mr. Bernard first, please.
I think that what you're pointing out is effectively that Canada is just so far behind on these issues of enforcing the law when it comes to anything that happens digitally. And so you're right to connect the fraud, the child sexual abuse material, the privacy violations, all this other illegal activity. It's the same question. Are we going to enforce the law when it happens digitally or not? And I really hope that you will invite Commissioner Lucky. I'll just give you one last point here. The Christchurch shooting that happened in March of 2019. I spoke with a fellow in Vancouver, Chris Trottier, who opened his phone and saw this, recommended to him. He didn't ask to see it. It was pushed to him. Is that a criminal offense? We need more case law, and to do that, we need more trials. And so I would really wonder why the RCMP does not consider those types of actions to constitute, quote, promotion. It seems to constitute promotion to me.
Monsieur, il me reste quelques...
I have a couple of seconds. Yes, go ahead. Mr. Richardson, I have a question for you. As an expert, would you say that we have lost control over our personal information and that we have to go through... Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Gaudreau. I'll have to interrupt you, but perhaps Mr. Richardson can answer at another time.
Madam Chair, I just stepping back from this a bit because I think for many of us this has been a pretty shocking study, and many of us I think are feeling in our guts something's fundamentally wrong. But I want to just, articulate that pornography is legal in Canada. Citizens have the right to watch weird things. People have the right to promote and show their consensual bedroom antics if that's what they like to do. Whether people like it or not, that is their right. The question is whether or not Pornhub, MindGeek has abused or failed to live up to their legal obligations. That, to me, is the fundamental question on non-consensual images, on issues of rape, on issues of particularly child abuse. So when I read Canada's legislation, going back to the mandatory reporting 2011 legislation, that a provider is obligated to reach out to the police if there are issues raised, but also within Canada, the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. So I want to go back to the Canadian Centre for a second. And you said that they began reporting somewhere around December, somewhere around the time the New York Times article blew the doors off everything. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can follow up with the exact date for you. They reached out to us directly to see how they could report into us.
So that would mean that, like, for basically 10 years of Canadian law, where we had very strong laws on the books, that they had not been reporting to you.
Correct.
That's correct. And Mr. Clark, they have different legal obligations in the United States, but they've reached out to you to be a partner. Well, they call themselves a partner, but voluntary coming forward of issues that I think any good corporate citizen would say, we don't want this on our site. They told us they didn't want bad things on their site. When did they reach out to you? You said that's been a matter of months?
Yeah, I believe it was in the latter part of 2020. I think earlier I said it was more recent, but I think it was in the latter part of 2020.
Yeah, in the latter part of 2020, when the New York Times broke the story. Possibly?
Most likely.
Most likely.
Most likely. Yep.
So 10 years before that in the United States, where we've had a number of survivors reach out to us from the United States, they were not reaching out to you to let you become aware or to work with them on helping these survivors, these victims.
That would be correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Maintenant, Monsieur.
Thank you. Mr. Gourde, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Gourde. Your mic is on mute. Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been listening to the witnesses since this morning, and there's been talk of international action, concerted action internationally, and we know that when it comes to cases that take place in the virtual space, borders don't exist. So my concern is this. So yes, we can create stricter legislation in Canada, but if we do all of that work, and then organizations like Pornhub can move their operations to other countries where they may not be protected as such, but where they're more shielded from the law and from being brought to justice. Because it's quite shocking to see how quickly those kinds of companies can move. And that makes it hard for us to know exactly what to do. So could witnesses perhaps give us an international view to see which countries we could work with and countries who might be more sensitive to the problem we're facing? And would it be possible to say that these crimes are, in fact, crimes against our children? And could those criminals be judged very severely in crimes against humanity? Mr. Clark or whoever can take the microphone first. Please go ahead.
Indeed, talking about criminal activity and to your question about which countries we should work with, again, it's very, very difficult. There's variances in all different international in countries we work with. But make no mistake, we do believe in strong enforcement, strong prosecution, a strong judicial system, the legalities surrounding this. I mean, the information superhighway is never meant to be unpoliced. If a crime happens on the street and is punishable by the law, it should be the same way if a crime is happening on the internet. It should be punishable by the full extent of the law.
Just if I can add in there to echo John's comments, it is very challenging. I would say though, Australia has done some very impressive work in this space. Also, as was mentioned by Daniel, the UK government has really taken a leadership role with their online harms paper and looking towards a sort of a different type of schema to look at this. I do want to just make one point that really has not been discussed here at all, and that goes back to the issue of accountability and oversight. Again, what we're relying on systems is still where it's up to the companies to come forward and to report. So we don't know the scale of the problem. We don't know, there's no oversight as to know if they are in fact reporting what they ought to be reporting. And it puts the users or survivors and victims in an unfair situation when they're dependent on these companies to do the right thing. So while we look at what is available to us, we have to also raise the important question about accountability and what is the oversight tied to what these companies are or are not doing.
So I would like to try to ask another question. So rather than trying to sue the platforms and the companies, well, we know that they belong to unscrupulous individuals. So would it be better to try to take the owners of those platforms to court? I think that that would hurt more, and it would be a faster route towards solving the problem.
You need more government certification to sell a toaster oven than you do to run Facebook or Pornhub. This idea of permissionless entry can be very difficult. Ultimately, I think the question is, can they operate legally? And if they can't, we should come down on them. You asked about international measures. As I said earlier, the companies may be based elsewhere, but there's a lot of money made here. And so just like we've done with other transnational criminal incidents, where the criminal themselves is not available, the money is. And if we target the money, I think we can make good progress. And that's something that Canada can do without waiting for international participation. As much as it would be great to work with other countries around the world, this could be one of those rare instances where we might want to lead globally. And I would encourage you seriously to do it. And we can start by calling the cops.
Thank you. There are just a few seconds left for you, Mr. Gould, so we will go to Ms. Latanzio. You have 5 minutes.
Chair. Thank you to our guests for being here this morning. My first question is for Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark, we heard Mr. Attoon from MindGeek during his testimony saying how proud he was of being a partner with NCMEC. And he clearly said in his testimony that he reports every instance of CSAM when they are aware of it, and so that this information could be disseminated or investigated by authorities across the globe. When we asked him, to give us a report of how many instances were reported just in 2019, they couldn't answer. So would you be in a position to provide us information in 2019 and going all the way back to 2008, if you can?
Sure. As was noted in my testimony, they are not a partner. In fact, we sent a letter to them soon after their testimony when we became aware that they were saying they were a partner, telling them that that was not true and that they should cease and desist from saying so. So that's important to note. In terms of the 2019 numbers, I'm not aware of any reporting that was happening that particular calendar year. In 2020, we did begin to receive some of the reports. Again, this is on a voluntary basis. We did note that many of those reports were duplicative. We have encouraged, like we do all of the ESPs, that they should begin a more strict content moderation. They should begin to actually know beforehand what's being uploaded and whether that content passes any of the legal requirements that they would have to post it. If they do not, it should not go up, period. They should not have to go back and look for it or have a victim call in and ask for it to be taken down. So that's something we encourage them all to do.
Okay, my next question is for Mr. Bernhardt. I hear very clearly from you this morning stating to us that we don't need to have more laws. You want the enforcement part to be acted upon ASAP. So my question to you is the following. The laws that we have presently, do you see or foresee any loopholes in the existing laws so that we can make sure that when indeed these companies or individuals are tried, they don't get away?
Thank you for your question. I think that the biggest problem happens, and we mentioned this in our report, when the offense is not criminal but civil, and the current system leaves it to the individual victim to take up their case with the platform. This happens often in cases of libel and defamation, and that's just impossible to expect that one person will have the emotional, financial resources to see that through. So one area where we do think that there could be improvement is for the government to empower someone like the Center for Child Protection to use government resources to be able to help escalate cases so that individual plaintiffs and individual complainants can have the force of government behind them to make sure that their complaints are seen through. So that's one area of enforcement where we think that there could definitely be an improvement. But as for the loopholes, we need to find out, and until a judge, points at one, we won't know. And so, let's get on with it. Is our lesson here, our message here. And if there are loopholes, we'll identify them, and Parliament can act to fix them.
Okay, so you're waiting for cases to come before the court so that we can establish some sort of jurisprudence on the issue. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, how much more time do I have? I'm going to continue with Mr. Bernhardt. The CRTC explains that it does not regulate internet content because consumers can already control access to an unsuitable material on the internet using the filtering software, and that any potential illegal content on the internet can be addressed with civil action. Existing hate crime legislation and the courts. How do you respond to the position taken by the CRTC?
The CRTC has exempted itself from the obligation to regulate online broadcasting. That's not actually a problem with the Broadcasting Act. The CRTC has created an order to let itself off the hook with this. We can litigate that on another occasion. I think the major implication for that is with Netflix and companies like this, but that does not excuse these platforms from civil law. It does not excuse these platforms from criminal law. And as I said earlier, these platforms will hide behind their scale. They will say, look how many videos, how could we possibly find all the illegal content inside? And my answer, and I hope your answer should be, I don't care. If you can't fly the plane safely, you can't sell tickets to the public. If you cannot operate this service legally, you can't operate it. It's really that simple. So the CRTC is disappointing in this case, but fortunately there are other avenues.
Thank you very much. That's your time, Ms. Latanzio. And I will now thank all the witnesses for appearing before us and suspend the meeting for 3 minutes before we come back on again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to welcome our witnesses today. Colleagues, just a note, after this panel, I propose that we go in camera to discuss some developments with our upcoming witnesses. The clerk will send out new codes for the in-camera portion, so we will suspend at about 1:30 to go in camera if members agree. We're all in agreement. Thank you very much. So I would like to introduce our witnesses here today from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Mr. Stephen White, Deputy Commissioner, Specialized Policing Services, Marie-Claude Arsenault, Chief Superintendent, Paul Boudreau, Executive Director, Technical Operations, Specialized Policing Services, and I believe we have Mr. Norman Wong from the Department of Justice. Is that correct, Madam Clerk? Very good. And will there be, will both the RCMP and the Department of Justice be presenting? Is there a presentation from the RCMP? Madam Clerk? I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Apologize for that. Yes, the RCMP will be doing an opening statement.
Very good. And the Department of Justice as well?
No, the Department of Justice will not be doing an opening statement.
Very good. Thank you very much. So we will now begin with the presentation from the RCMP. Mr. White.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. Just going to turn off the interpretation here. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today on this pressing matter. My colleagues from the RCMP have been introduced, and I'd like to highlight that Chief Superintendent Marie-Claude Arsenault, who is with us, who oversees sensitive and specialized investigative services, also includes the National Child Exploitation Crime Center, and Mr. Paul Boudreau, Executive Director of Technical Operations for the RCMP. And it's also a pleasure to have our colleague from the Department of Justice here with us as well. I'd like to describe for a couple of minutes just a broader context of online child sexual exploitation and highlight the RCMP's steadfast efforts towards combating this crime and bringing offenders to justice. Online child sexual exploitation is one of the most egregious forms of gender-based violence and human rights violations in Canada. Not only are children, particularly girls, victimized through sexual abuse, but often they are re-victimized through their lives as photos, videos, and/or stories of their abuse are shared repeatedly on the internet amongst offenders. In 2004, the Government of Canada announced the National Strategy for the Protection of Children from Sexual Exploitation on the Internet, which brings the RCMP, Public Safety Canada, the Department of Justice, and the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, C3P, together to provide a comprehensive, coordinated approach to enhancing the protection of children from online child sexual exploitation. The Canadian Centre for Child Protection is a non-governmental organization that operates cybertip.ca, Canada's tip line to report suspected online sexual exploitation of children. The Criminal Code provides a comprehensive range of offences relating to online child sexual exploitation. Canadian Police Services, including the RCMP, are responsible for investigating these offences when there is a possible link to Canada. The Criminal Code also authorizes courts to order the removal of specific material, for example, a voyeuristic recording, an intimate image, and child pornography that is stored on and made available through a computer system in Canada. The RCMP's National Child Exploitation Crime Center is the national law enforcement arm of the national strategy and functions as a central point of contact for investigations related to online sexual exploitation of children in Canada and international investigations involving Canadian victims, offenders, or Canadian companies hosting child sexual exploitation material. The Centre investigates online child sexual exploitation and provides a number of critical services to law enforcement agencies, including immediately responding to a child at risk, coordinating investigative files with police of jurisdiction across Canada and internationally, identifying and rescuing victims, conducting specialized investigations, gathering, analyzing, and generating intelligence in support of operations, engaging in operational research, and developing and implementing technical solutions. The Center has seen firsthand the dramatic increase in reports of online child sexual exploitation in recent years. In 2019, the Center received 102,927 requests for assistance, an increase of 68% since 2018, and an overall increase of 1,106% since 2014. The majority of the referrals the Center receives come from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in the United States, and every report is assessed and actioned where possible. Outre le nombre élevé de signalements,
in addition to high volumes of reports, online child sexual exploitation cases have become increasingly complex because of technology such as encryption, the dark web, and anonymity. Offenders can operate undetected by law enforcement. Investigations relating to online platforms also raise a host of other issues relating to the Internet, such as lack of data retention by platforms, the volume and speed at which content can be posted and disseminated, and the ability for users to download the hosted material. As content is successfully removed from one platform, it can be easy to be uploaded to the same platform. Which results in ongoing re-victimization and a proliferation of child sexual exploitation material across a multitude of platforms. It is well known that offenders safeguard material on personal devices or through cloud services.
Exploitation is often multi-jurisdictional or multinational, affecting victims across jurisdictions and creating additional complexities for law enforcement. No single government or organization can address this crime alone. The RCMP works diligently with its partners at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels in Canada and internationally, as well as with non-governmental organizations, to strengthen efforts to rescue victims and bring offenders to justice. In fact, the RCMP is the current chair of the Virtual Global Task Force, an international police alliance dedicated to the protection of children from online sexual exploitation and other transnational child sex offenses. The Virtual Global Task Force consists of law enforcement, NGOs, and industry partners working collaboratively to find effective response strategies. And Chief Superintendent Arsenault, who is with us today, is the current chair of this very important group. The RCMP also seeks to work closely with the private sector, as offenders regularly utilize platforms operated by internet and/or communication service providers to carry out a range of criminal code offenses relating to online child sexual exploitation. The RCMP regularly engages private sector partners to discuss existing legislation, which includes an act respecting the mandatory reporting of internet child pornography by persons who provide an internet service, referred to as the Mandatory Reporting Act, which came into force in 2011. The Mandatory Reporting Act requires internet service providers to report tips they receive regarding websites where child pornography may be publicly available to the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. Under the Mandatory Reporting Act, internet service providers are also required to notify police and safeguard evidence if they believe that a child pornography offense has been committed using their internet service. Since the Mandatory Reporting Act came into force in 2011, the RCMP has seen a continual increase in reporting from industry partners. Many online platforms pose jurisdictional challenges, as I have outlined earlier. An online platform that is registered in Canada may maintain its servers abroad, which could limit the effect of a Canadian warrant. Further, when a global company registered abroad that has a Canadian presence is likely to host its content abroad, making jurisdiction difficult to determine. When an online platform permits its users and/or themselves to personally download material to and upload material from their own computers, it becomes impossible to determine where this material may be stored or prevent it from reappearing and being further disseminated. De nouvelles entreprises, plateformes et applications continuent.
New companies will continue to evolve, and the Government of Canada has to evolve with the same rhythm in order to address these crimes.
Wrapping up, I think we need to move to cash.
Yeah, this will be my last couple of sentences. Yep.
Very good.
Okay. Service providers operating in Canada have to deal with go beyond online child sexual exploitation. I think the committee is aware the parameters are wide and include rape, various forms of violence, and non-consensual distribution of intimate images, such as revenge porn. Sadly, many victims who have been victimized through sites such as these may not involve law enforcement due to the fear of repercussions from their families, friends, and employers, or because they feel a sense of shame. These offenses have damaging and long-term impacts on our citizens and on our societies, and we must strive to do better. Thank you for inviting us here today. We look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. I now go to Mr. Viersen for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. Section 163.1 of the Criminal Code makes it an offense to make available or distribute CSAM. MindGeek executives told us that none of this exists on their site. Have you found this to be true, Mr. White? Mute, Mr. White.
Mr. White, your mute is on.
No, actually, we have had referrals from our partner in the United States that I mentioned, NCMEC, with regards to disclosures by that company to us regarding that content.
Okay. We've heard multiple times that at this committee now that documented cases of minors having videos of their exploitation put up on MindGeek. The big question for us is to understand why the owners have not faced charges. Is there a problem with the laws as they currently stand?
Yeah, obviously there are a number of elements to when and what types of charges will be laid. Obviously, when we're talking about these corporations, which are service providers, hosting platforms, other individuals have the ability to automatically load their content onto the platforms. There's jurisdiction issues, but every case is different. And I would ask my colleague, Chief Superintendent Arsenault, if she can add to that.
Ms. Arsenault?
I think we.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I would add that every situation is assessed and looking at the evidence that we have that would determine if we have enough to proceed with charges. As mentioned with MindGeek or Pornhub, we've received since June 2020 about 120 reports which were actioned or assessed, I should say.
Madame Arsenault, on a perdu.
We couldn't hear you, Madame Arsenault.
120. Did you hear that?
Yes, very good.
Okay.
Yes, continue.
120 reports which have been triaged and prioritized. Some were referred to law enforcement, other law enforcement in Canada, and others were deemed to be not online child sexual exploitation for various reasons, and that's it.
The presence of the download button on the MindGeek Pornhub site, that seems like a clear violation of the distribution part of the CSAM laws. Is that part of your case? Is that been flagged? How come we haven't seen any charges, I guess?
Well, again, we we have to look at all the evidence that we have, and my understanding is that function has been taken out, but without the evidence, there's limited action we can do. So we are assessing all the reports that we're getting now and determining if charges are likely to happen.
Okay. So up until recently, you have not had any reports of MindGeek or of CSAM on MindGeek or Pornhub sites. Is that, if I'm hearing you correctly?
June 2020.
Okay. Okay. The government has indicated that it will table legislation that will require companies like MindGeek to remove illegal content from websites within 24 hours. Do you think that's enough? We know that some of the cases that we've seen here, within 24 hours, some of these videos have millions of views. 24 hours, short enough period of time?
Who's the question is
yeah.
directed to?
Yeah, please, Ms. Arsenault.
Well, any action that will improve on the reporting and any tools that will assist law enforcement in getting the information as fast as we can, as we're trying to identify and rescue the victim in a timely manner.
One of the areas, in other areas of sexual assault, there's some like bail hearings and things like that. There's like a reverse onus that gets placed on the defendant. Would there be any area in this area of the law where a reverse onus would be helpful? I'm just thinking taking a screenshot and saying like, hey, prove that this is not the case. That this looks bad. Prove that it's not the case. Is that an opportunity in the law?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a possibility for it in terms of this type of content. Obviously, we'd have to look very closely at that with our justice officials to see if that type of provision would be able to apply. And I'm not sure if our colleague Norman from Justice can add anything to that.
I'm sorry, he won't have time to reply, but perhaps in the next further along. Mr. Dong for 6 minutes. Mr. Dong, we're not hearing you. Yeah, this is unfortunate.
No, it's not working?
Back on. You're back on. Great.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, no, I want to thank all the witnesses for coming forward. And I hope I get that extra minute because of technical difficulties. To Mr. White, first thing first, I remember in 2019, the government announced an expansion of national strategy for protecting children from sexual exploitation on the internet. And I think the total was over $22 million. And specifically, $15.25 million was to enhance the capacity of Internet Child Exploitation Unit, which is the ICE unit. And can you tell us, has that capacity of RCMP's ICE unit across the country being enhanced as a result of this additional investment?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. We did receive additional funding, and we have implemented new resources, both within the National Crime Center here in Ottawa that I mentioned, Child Exploitation Crime Center, as well in ICE units across the country. And a lot of those units across the country are integrated units. They're made up of RCMP and other local police services as well.
Thank you. And along the same line as my conservative colleague's question, we've heard testimonies coming from the witnesses saying that, subsidiary companies of MindGeek, sometimes they would share content or move some non-consensual or child pornography content to other platforms to add content to them. In itself, isn't that a violation of criminal code? Have you done any investigation on their, they're intentionally adding content to the subsidiary companies to make money? Have you done any investigation on that?
No, we're not aware. We haven't been informed of them adding their own content, child sexual exploitation content, if that's what you're referring to.
And let's say going forward, if you find that there is enough ground to start an investigation, will you be able to go back, because the executive of MindGeek told us they've made some improvement on their sort of approval process or screening process, so everything's great now. But would you be able to go back retroactively, take a look at their act in the past?
Yeah, it would depend on their preservation of data retention policies that they have. So, and it's different across different companies or platforms, internet providers, how long they retain their data. So that is always a concern for us when we're doing investigations and going back and trying to look backwards for a period in time and whether or not that data has been retained.
Good. And in your view, or based on your knowledge with Pornhub, do you think they've met their obligation to report?
Yeah, I can't say. Under the Mandatory Reporting Act, there is a very strict requirement there. My understanding is we have received reports from NCMEC in the United States from Pornhub. Now, I am not in a position to be able to say what we receive is all that there is to receive, but I can confirm I've been informed that we have received some disclosures.
So this is actually a very interesting point that you brought up. I didn't get a chance to ask to my the previous session. Why is Pornhub reporting to NCMEC as opposed to reporting to the authority directly? Isn't it very strange that they report to a not-for-profit organization to report to the police?
Yeah, in the United States, one of the reporting entities is NCMEC. That's why a lot of the disclosures we get, not just from Pornhub, but other internet service providers and hosting platforms, if they have a presence in the United States, they are able to disclose to the American entity as well.
Good.
I think, yeah.
So we know that its headquarters in Montreal, but we also heard through testimonies that it has subsidiaries, basically their business model all over the world. Would that itself pose any challenge to your ability of or your authority to look into their operation?
Yeah, without a doubt, it's always a challenge for us when we're talking about large international entities such as this one, and where they're housed could be different from where they're incorporated. Where they're incorporated and housed could be different from where they maintain their servers with their data. They may also have data that exists in cloud storage as well, which is evolving as well. So all those add, without a doubt, certain level of complexities for investigating.
So I just want to confirm you have not started any investigation against MindGeek or Pornhub. Is that correct?
No, we have not.
Okay. And just going back to my previous point, is there any
to my knowledge, we have.
Can you confirm this and let the committee know afterwards?
We'll look at that, yes.
Thank you. And to your previous point, is there any recommendation from you that the committee can recommend to the government to make it flexible or easier for you to look at the wider scope of their practice around the world?
Just wondering if you could clarify that.
Yeah, so if you can provide some recommendations afterwards to the committee, that'd be appreciated.
With regards to? Sorry, I missed your question.
To enable you to look at a wider scope, a wider operation of MindGeek, since it's a transnational company with various tentacles, financial tentacles around the world. Anything the committee can do to help you to effectively investigate if there will be an investigation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maintenant, on va passer la parole.
And now, Madame Gaudreau, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you. Madam Chair, I see that my connection has improved. But if you need to, let me know and I will turn my video off. So my colleague was talking about an increase in investments of more than $22 million, and that made it possible to better staff the units that work on this. But I have 3 questions, and I have 5 minutes to ask them. So I'm wondering whether the funding is based on the complaints you've received, or do you have enough funds for prevention? So the question is, why is it that we've heard about what MindGeek Pornhub was doing in the media? So we know that after the article, there have been changes. You can't re-upload things. But before that, they were doing all of this. And I want to know what you have and can do with regard to prevention and then intervention once you get complaints. Yes, thank you very much for your question. We can always do more on the side of prevention. So the more prevention you can do, the better. I think that earlier, Ms. Arsenault talked about the number of calls that we get and how many investigators it would take to look at all of those calls. So, and I'll let Ms. Arsenault answer about the number of complaints that we get. So yes, that's right, because there wouldn't have been, if we'd done enough prevention, we wouldn't be in this situation today. So yes, I would like to hear what Ms. Arsenault has to say. Yes. It's true that we are often in reaction mode because there are so many calls about this and so many complaints. So we would like to have a proactive system to identify victims so we could have better means to carry out more complex investigations, to identify the victims and help them get out of the abusive situation. I'm sorry, I don't have very much time, but when it comes to the investment of over $22 million, does that mean that right now you are better equipped to do prevention? Because we can see that the legislation is so different and they have a business model, and so MindGeek and Pornhub has done everything in its power to continue operating. So I'm wondering, with the sum of money that I mentioned and prevention, what is missing? What do you need to be able to face all of this? Answer. Well, we always need more resources, of course, but what we are using is those resources to be able to be more proactive, to try to prioritize cases so that we can stop abuse that is taking place. And I would also say that it is incredibly important to be able to work in partnership to carry out these investigations. Yes, with regard to partnerships, you or Mr. White can answer. You were saying earlier that you were having trouble with regard to areas of jurisdiction. I would like to hear more about that because, of course, things are different in different provinces in Canada. So I was wondering whether you could talk about partnership so that the law can be enforced. Answer. We work very closely with our partners in the provinces and municipal police forces as well, provincial police. And there are teams in all provinces and all the big cities, in Toronto, for example. We have partnership with the OPP as well, who have resources to carry out that kind of investigation. Yes, but you also talked about 120 reports, and those reports were for CSAM? Or does that also include adults who reported and material on those platforms and the material was not withdrawn? I'll ask Ms. Arsenault to answer that. Yes, the 120 reports were through NCMEC, So it was Pornhub to NCMEC, and 25 of those 120 were sent to different police forces throughout the country. And that was for CSAM. 93 of the cases did not meet the criminal code definition, and there are 2 others that are being assessed. So I have 30 seconds left, and I would ask if we could urgently change something to give you the tools that you need to put a stop to this scourge. What would you need other than financial resources? What can we do as legislators?
That we could be looking at. I've already touched on a number of them with regards to making sure we get access to the data. You know, any information we would be able to have access to upfront, more urgency, more basic subscriber information, type of information. Ensuring that all the entities that are required under the Mandatory Reporting Act are reporting. So obviously we would need some level of compliance around that. Encryption is becoming a challenge for law enforcement in terms of regular encryption, end-to-end encryption. People are able to become a lot more anonymous and hide their identities on the internet as well. So there are actually quite a number of elements that that we are looking at and having discussions on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, we will now go to Mr. Angus for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you so much. Mr. White, you talk about your private sector partners that you work with. So Pornhub MindGeek is one of your partners?
To my knowledge, we are not a partner with them. When I refer to partners, I'm referring to...
Okay, so who are your private sector partners if the biggest porn company in Canada isn't one of them? Who's your private sector partners that you work with?
Yeah, we are working with some of the bigger companies, Google, Facebook. When I mentioned the global task force earlier.
But you're not working with Pornhub MindGeek?
Not to my knowledge, but
okay.
I will ask Madame Arsenault.
Sorry, so just have you watched any of this testimony of what we're studying here? We're studying Pornhub MindGeek. So
yes.
They aren't one of your partners. You get your information from NCMEC, is that correct?
And CMEC, yes.
Okay. 2011, the Canadian Parliament passed a law that if a internet content hosting service provider came across issues of child abuse online, that they had a legal obligation to report to the police. That was 2011. So how many cases have been reported to you by Pornhub MindGeek since 2011?
I will ask Madame Arsenault to confirm that, but it's my understanding we've only just been in 2020 receiving complaints.
From NCMEC?
We received 120 reports through NCMEC.
Okay. So here's the thing. You come here and you talk about how you could get more money to do a better job. We've had a law on the books for 10 years. And yet you're getting, since 2020, reports from an American agency when the law says if there's allegations, it has to go to the police. You have no record of any of that. It has to go to the Canadian Child Centre. So thank God that the Americans are sending you some information here. And I ask that because we have had multiple witnesses come forward. And we're not just talking about child pornography. We're not talking about encryption in the dark net. We're talking witnesses who say that modern sexual assault is being tied to what is happening online, that it is being promoted, and it is being promoted in a Canadian company. And so, just to clarify, you say you have absolutely no cases outstanding against Pornhub MindGeek for all the cases that have been brought forward?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. And then you said you had a problem with jurisdiction. How could you have a problem with jurisdiction when they're based in Montreal?
Jurisdiction where part of the company may be based in Montreal, it may be incorporated elsewhere, and their servers could be located elsewhere as well.
Okay, I find that interesting because when I read the law, it doesn't mention their servers. It mentions their service. Pornhub MindGeek is an internet service. And as an internet service, it promotes content, adult content, it promotes sexual content. The law doesn't say if Pornhub MindGeek has their servers in Cyprus, you can't touch them. They are they are providing a service, they have a legal obligation. So have you had any legal opinion from your people about what the difference is between the service they provided and your inability to check their servers, or have you just not tried to check their servers because you haven't followed through with any cases?
No. The cases we followed through are on the ones that are referred to us. So they have a presence in the United States, and they report it through that entity in the United States who passed it on to us. So
okay, thank you.
120 reports that were mentioned those are and have been looked at.
Okay, again, I'm looking at Canadian law here, and it doesn't say that a Canadian entity should go to the United States to refer so that they could then refer to the RCMP. They said they have an obligation to report to the police, which is in Canada. I just want to read you an email I received from one of the survivors. And again, we're not talking about one or two cases here. We've come across many. This survivor wrote to me on Friday afternoon. She said, "I'm glad you're talking to the RCMP on Monday. I hope they can answer why they don't do anything. I emailed them and asked them to investigate Pornhub's part in my video because I think it was illegal. They didn't even answer. But here's the point," she said. "I was scared to try again. I'm worried if I push the issue, they'll just get mad and stop working on these cases." The issue of survivors having to go and ask you to do their job, the job that you're supposed to do, and you tell us that you actually haven't initiated any cases, it sounds like you're not even going to get mad at this poor survivor. You just haven't done it. Can you explain to us, after all the testimony we've heard, why you're still talking about dealing with the dark net, needing more resources, working with the United States, and you are not addressing the issues that have been brought forward, the credible issues of sexual abuse and non-consensual acts that have happened on this service? What are you giving us here?
I can say the reports that are referred to us, regardless of which entity refers it, they are assessed, and if it's deemed to be content that needs to be investigated further, packages are put together and sent out to police services across the country.
But the survivor here who wrote me, she said, "I asked them to investigate Pornhub's involvement in my video because I think it was illegal, and the RCMP didn't even answer. And I was scared to try again."
I see that Mr. Wong has his hands up. If the committee agrees, we'll just give Mr. Wong 10 or 15 seconds if you have a response. Mr. Wong?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, because this issue has come up a number of times in relation to jurisdiction, it is a complicating factor in all these cases. As Inspector White talked about, there's the issue of incorporation in Luxembourg, headquartered in Montreal, but its servers are located around the world, but mainly in the United States. The operation of the Mandatory Reporting Act, and Mr. Angus is correct in relation to the definition of internet service. Pornhub meets that definition, but the obligations under Section 3 of the Act is when they have reasonable grounds to believe that they found child pornography on their servers. The operation of the Mandatory Reporting Act.
I'll have to stop you there, Mr. Wong, but if you have further information to give us, please provide it to the committee in writing. I will now go to Mrs. Wagenthal for 5 minutes, I believe. Yes. Mute.
Yes, there we go. Thank you very much, Chair. It's a real privilege to be part of this conversation today on behalf of those who are being victimized at unbelievable levels. It's frightening, and we have to do something. I noticed here a comment that we've only investigated around 120 reports, 25 of which qualified to go to our police force. That means that 90, it was indicated, did not meet criminal code definition, which I just have to ask the question, it begs the question, why and what should we be doing to improve this criminal code definition so that these circumstances aren't taking place? I can't imagine that these other cases shouldn't qualify to be investigated.
Yeah, no, I'll just start and I'll turn over to Madame Arsenault, but
I would
every one of these
like
cases,
to ask
yeah.
Mr. Wong as well, please.
Sure, yeah.
Mr. Wong.
Every one of these cases that come into the National Child Exploitation Crime Center, they are fully analyzed. And, you know, back earlier, we have some very good people, some very passionate people in that unit doing this work. Yeah. And
Well,
they do a
excuse me,
very
Mr.
thorough
White,
analysis.
I'm not questioning their analysis. They're doing their analysis and deeming 90 of them as not meeting criminal code definitions. So, Mr. Wong, what's the problem here? What do we have to do to improve that area?
Maybe before, if I can just clarify, it did not met the definition of child pornography of the criminal code. So a lot of the vast majority were cases like age difficult media, meaning that we cannot definitely ascertain whether the individual is under the age of 18 years old.
So, Mr. Wong, how do we improve this?
Oh, well, I will just add to what Marie-Claude said. The definition of child pornography in the criminal code is amongst the broadest in the world. We protect children under 18. The problem, as Marie-Claude mentioned, is the age difficult media. When there's secondary sexual characteristics, unless you're dealing with an identifiable person, it's very difficult for anyone to tell whether that person is above 18 or below 18. So a lot of that material is not captured, and that's probably what Marie-Claude is talking about.
That's very disconcerting. There has been a lot of talk about the issue around jurisdiction, and Madame Arsenault, you're chairing the Virtual Global Task Force, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for your work. However, I just can't help but think there's got to be a way with MindGeek to work together in a way internationally, because this is an international issue, to provide that capability to have jurisdiction absolutely wherever you need it for something like this. So why is that not something that has been being worked on internationally, or is it? And what needs to be done as far as Canada's responsibility in enabling us to be able to get over that hurdle? Because clearly it's a method of avoidance.
Well, within the Virtual Global Task Force, these challenges are pretty well, many of the countries have similar challenges with jurisdictional issues. We are working in identifying all these challenges, law enforcement challenges. We also work as part of the VGT. We have industry and NGOs that are partners of the VGT. We also work with other NGOs that had some influence internationally to advocate for some of the challenges. Perhaps Mr. Wong can speak from the international side on legislative groups as well that are looking at these issues.
Thank you. I'd like to kind of expand that a little bit. However, you're commenting that you're working on it internationally. I know of NGOs that have reported to me of scenarios like this and have said that as the police force, it's very difficult to function in this environment because you don't have the jurisdictional support that you need. And it's supposedly been being worked on for a very long time. And yet we have a situation here where we've only had 120 reports since 2020, that type of a thing. So what has been accomplished or what is being done that it's taking so long to get any kind of cooperation internationally to deal with this horrific situation?
Well, the cooperation is there amongst all international partners when it comes to exchange of information, exchange of intelligence, sharing our best practices and so on. On the legislative side, our group of law enforcement have not as control as to, changing the laws.
So, Mr. Wong.
I'm sorry, we'll have to stop you there.
Well, if Mr. Wong could provide an answer in his written results, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, very good. No, very good idea, Ms. Wagenthal. So I now move to Madame Latanzio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here with us today to be able to provide us essential information that's going to help us along, I hope, in completing this study. My questions are for Mr. Wong, specifically 3 areas that I'd like to hear you on, because I understand that there are limitations with regards to the application of the law right now, and changes might be necessary, or amendments to it might be necessary, so that we can address this issue. So the first one is really the definition of child pornography, because I think that that's what's posing a problem. Number 2, the question of jurisdiction. I heard you say that it implies the question of having the material on the server, but what about the question of making the material available and distributed in different countries? Would the fact that it would not appear in that material would appear in a specific country, make it make the material or the distribution and availability of that material in that country a question of jurisdiction? So therefore, if it appears there, then it would have legal jurisdiction to be able to try. And number 3, the question of onus, of responsibility. We heard that there could be a defense in terms of ignorance. We didn't know, until someone flags it, or the responsibility is shifted over to the person who uploads. Would legislative changes in terms of shifting the onus of responsibility onto those that make this kind of a material readily available, would that not the shift of responsibility other than the victims themselves? Because we've heard the testimony of Ms. Fleitas, and it was heartbreaking to hear that she tried and tried and tried with proof of identity, with a license, and yet again the material was taken down very temporarily, only to reappear again and again and again. So a repeated assault. So I'd like to hear you on these 3 points. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a lot to unpack there, but I would just like to say, again, the definition of child pornography in the criminal code is among the world's broadest. It's not only images that we protect against or criminalize the distribution of, but it also audio pornography and also 2 forms of written pornography. So I'm not sure that it's the problem of the law. It often is the problem of the application of the law and how that works when the rubber hits the road. We've heard Inspector White talked about the circumstances in which these things come up, and Marie-Claude was talking about how much evidence and proof there is into being able to follow up on an investigation. In relation to the jurisdiction, and that's the more difficult part, and Marie-Claude was talking about what we're doing internationally as well. Canada's involved in the negotiation of a 2nd additional protocol to the Budapest Convention, and that's the only sort of international convention that covers cybercrime. And in that convention, there's specific provisions or articles on child pornography. So there is the ability of the international community to deal with this, but that 2nd additional protocol has to do with transborder access to data, because it's almost a universal problem among all countries trying to combat crime in this sphere. Other work is ongoing at the UN right now with the negotiation of a new cybercrime treaty, and also the 5 Eyes. Ms. McDonald in the previous panel mentioned the voluntary principles that they're working on. Our largest partner, the United States, also enacted the US Cloud Act, and that is another method of addressing the issue of transborder access to data. Canada is involved in all those aspects. In terms of shifting the onus, there is a difficulty, and Mr. Angus, was highlighting some of the issues about the person who wrote in about the difficulty of getting their material taken down off these sites. There is a lag in that, because the problem with some of this material, like the revenge porn, so someone has to be affected. A lot of companies, it's very difficult for them to police, because without a complaint, there's no way of distinguishing that revenge porn from something that is otherwise completely legal. So there's always going to be a bit of a lag time, and I think it was mentioned the 24-hour takedown that Minister Guilbeault's looking at in terms of the online harms work that that Canadian Heritage is looking at.
I'll have to stop you there, Mr.
Sure.
Wong. Colleagues, I think on veut compléter avec.
We would like to finish with Ms. Gaudreau and Mr. Angus, and then we will have to stop to go in camera.
And now for 2.5 minutes.
Oui, en fait, quand vous avez parlé.
Yes, when you talked about that process earlier, we've been talking about the 120 reports, and I got a lot of answers to my question, but what I'd like to know is how much proof, how much evidence do you need for the complaint to lead to investigation? Can you explain to me how that works? I'm going to ask Madame Arsenault to speak to those steps. Yes, go ahead. Madame Arsenault?
Quelqu'un
OK,
d'autre?
OK. Vous m'entendez? Oui?
Can you hear me? I'm sorry. It was hard for me to unmute myself. So when we're doing a triage, first of all, we have to try and see that it's meeting the definition of child pornography. And if it meets the definition, so we have to ensure that it is a child. And then we have other factors. Sometimes investigations are very complicated. We have to look at the abuse, the types of abuse, the violence, the severity. So there are many factors that come in play. We also have to take into account data. Some companies keep the information for a very short time, and then we have to try and get the information very quickly to establish the elements of proof. So we take into account several aspects. Question. I'm sorry, your time is up.
Snappy.
Well, thank you for that, Madam Chair. I want to go back to this issue of the fact that Parliament signed a law in place in 2011 on mandatory reporting for service providers. We understand that last year, or 2020, the RCMP received their first report. So that's almost 10 years of no reports. So if in that time case X tried to come forward, case Y came forward, case Z came forward with issues of non-consensual or child abuse on that platform and nothing was done, the fact that they're reporting now to NCMEC, is that okay for the RCMP? Do you just say, well, that was then, this is now, they're now complying with NCMEC, or do they have legal obligations that they failed to fulfill under the laws of Canada?
Yeah, no, when I referred earlier to the reports, the 120 reports that we received from NCMEC, that was directly related to Pornhub, to my knowledge. We have been receiving reports over the years since the
sorry, you've been receiving reports from Pornhub MindGeek? Because I thought I asked earlier and you hadn't.
We have. The ones we've received from Pornhub MindGeek are the ones that have been transmitted through the NCMEC. But with
Since
regards
2020.
to, yes, but with regards to reports since the Mandatory Reporting Act has come into play from other entities.
Yeah, I'm not
from
interested in
here
other
Canada
entities.
as
We're
well.
studying Pornhub MindGeek, so you haven't had any. So is that like 10-year lag? Is that like you guys are just saying, okay, well, now they're complying and giving it to the Americans, and the Americans are giving it to us. Is that okay?
To my knowledge, we would have to confirm if we have received over that period of time any others.
Thank you.
All right. So you're done, Mr. Angus. Thank you very much for that. And so colleagues, we will terminate the public part of the meeting, take a 10-minute break. For the time to come back, you have been sent the codes for the in-camera portion of our committee business meeting. And so we have 10 minutes until 1:43 to come back in and recommence. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the witnesses.
Thank you.
you.